I do not believe in ghosts. I did not, anyway, not until that first night inside Riverside Galleria. Now I am not sure I believe in the living either. The mall had been dead for years, escalators frozen mid-step, its storefronts plastered with faded sale signs from some long-forgotten season. They had told me the job would be easy money. Walk the empty corridors a couple of times. Make sure no kids broke in to spray paint the walls or film a TikTok. Then clock out and collect a paycheck. It was supposed to be nothing more than boredom and fluorescent lighting. But standing under those flickering ceiling panels at 2 in the morning, I realized something else was awake in there with me. Something that did not breathe, but moved. The first sign was a sound so small it almost escaped me. I was walking past the food court, where a row of cracked vinyl booths sat like tombstones around shuttered kiosks. The air smelled like stale popcorn and industrial cleanora scent you would expect in an abandoned mall. What you would not expect was the faint rustling of shopping bags. Paper bags, the kind you get at a department store. It was impossibly soft, like someone gently crumpling tissue paper behind one of the dark counters. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking across a closed until further notice sign. I called out to half-hearted, "Hey, anyone in here?" That sounded too loud against the silence. Nothing answered. I told myself it was a rat. Maybe a draft moving debris. The human brain does not want to believe in anything worse. But then the overhead music system disconnected for years, crackled with static. For half a heartbeat, I swear I heard the faintest jingle of a mall commercial. Everything you need, all in one place. Then it vanished, leaving only the hum of my own blood in my ears. I should have left then. I should have called my supervisor, told him the wiring was faulty or that trespassers had snuck in. But curiosity is a cruel thing. I tightened my jacket around my shoulders and kept walking. Down the north wing, the mannequins stood in dusty window displays like prisoners awaiting a pardon. Their plastic faces were blank, except one that seemed to be turned slightly farther than I remembered. Maybe it had always been like that. Maybe. But as I passed, I could not shake the sensation that its hollow eyes followed me. When you patrol a dead mall at night, you learn to measure silence. There is the ordinary silence, thick and heavy, and then there is the kind that feels alive like something is holding its breath, listening. That night, the silence felt alive. I checked the old department store First Kensington's, the anchor store that had gone under years ago. Its wide glass doors were smeared with grime, but a single fluorescent tube inside flickered to life as I approached, bathing the dust motes in a sickly glow. I told myself the motion sensor must still have some charge left. I told myself a lot of things. Inside, the store was a cavern of empty shelves and toppled racks. My boots crunched on broken hangers, the smell of mildew mixed with something faintly sweet, like perfume that had lingered too long on a forgotten scarf. And then clear as day I heard the squeak of a shopping cart wheel. It came from deeper inside, from the shadows near the former electronics section. One squeak, then another. The rhythm of a cart being pushed along tile. I lifted my flashlight, but the beam only reached so far, illuminating the edges of displays long stripped bare. The sound stopped. I called out again. Malls closed. If you're in here, you need to leave. My voice cracked on the last word. Silence. I took a few careful steps forward, the light bouncing off columns and broken signage. Then, just for a moment, I glimpsed movimenta reflection, maybe like the silver glint of a cart handle slipping around a corner. I rushed after it, but the aisle was empty. Only my own footprints disturbed the dust. Something inside me whispered that this was wrong in a way vandals or squatters could not explain. The mall's electricity had been disconnected summers ago. The food court ovens had been ripped out, the arcade machines hauled away. There should not have been power for lights or music or security cameras, let alone an unseen shopper prowling Kensington's with a phantom cart. I wanted to radio the situation in, but the static in my earpiece hissed like a warning. No words came through, just a faint murmur, like distant conversation echoing down a hallway that did not exist. I backed out of Kensington's, keeping my eyes on the dark aisles as long as I could, until the door clicked shut behind me. The mall felt colder now, as though the air itself had thinned. By the time I reached the security office, my hands were shaking. I stared at the bank of dusty monitors. Most of them were dead, but one flickered camera 4 aimed at the main concourse. On the screen, under the dead mall's skylight, a lone figure glided past. Too tall, limbs slightly wrong, pushing something that glimmered like chrome. The feed cut to static. That was the moment I realized Riverside Galleria was not abandoned at all. And if you are thinking this is just another mall ghost story, you are wrong. What I saw next, what I heard next will change the way you look at every empty building you pass at night. Because something was still shopping. People in this town used to talk about Riverside Galleria the way you talk about an old friend who moved away fondly but with a twinge of sadness. When I was a kid, the Galleria was the place. A two-level monument to consumerism, with a carousel at its heart and an atrium skylight that poured sunshine onto the terrazzo floor. Weekends smelled like cinnamon pretzels and orange chicken from the food court. On Christmas Eve, you could not find a parking space if your life depended on it, but over time, the place withered, one by one. The big stores shuttered. The arcade became a spirit Halloween store every October and then nothing at all. When the cinema closed, the lifeblood drained completely. By the time I was old enough to get a job there, Riverside Galleria was already a corpse, its once polished floors dusty, its fountains dry. The security company told me straight. The mall was abandoned except for occasional construction workers and copper thieves. My job was to walk the corridors, check the doors, and make sure no kids were filming prank videos in the empty food court. Easy paycheck, they said. What they did not say was that half the locals refused to drive past the place after dark. At the diner, where I sometimes grab coffee, old-timers whisper stories about Riverside. A night cleaner who swore he heard crowds shopping long after closing. A janitor who found fresh footprints in a locked department store. Teenagers dared each other to spend the night inside and came out pale, refusing to explain why. One rumor claimed a worker got trapped in the escalator shaft during demolition and was never found. Officially, that never happened, but people in town still pause when they drive by, as if expecting the sliding doors to open on their own. I should have taken those whispers more seriously. The first time I stepped into the mall as an employee was the afternoon before my first shift. My supervisor, Ron, was a heavy-set guy with coffee breath and a faded company logo on his polo. He handed me the keys and a radio, then gave me a tour. Lights still work in some sections, he said, his voice echoing in the empty halls. Do not freak out if you hear the HVAC kicking on. Half of this place is wired like Frankenstein's monster pieces of old systems duct taped together. Power surges happen. He pointed to the camera bank in the security office. Most are dead. Camera 4 sometimes flickers back on. Just ignore it. If it does, it is a glitch in the system. I did not ask why camera 4 was the only one flickering. I should have. The empty mall was unsettling even in daylight. The skylight atrium was filthy, streaked with grime that made the sun weak and sickly. Storefronts were sealed with plywood or dusty glass. A fake ficus tree leaned drunkenly near the information desk. The silence was oppressive-like. The building was holding its breath, waiting for someone to notice it still existed. I lingered near the carousel. Its horses, once bright with carnival colors, were faded and chipped. One horse's eye had cracked, leaving a spider web of fractures that made it look like it was crying. I remembered riding that carousel with my sister when we were kids, back when the mall was alive. The memory should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like someone else's life. Ron left me with a shrug. Do your rounds, keep the doors locked, and call me only if you see fire or blood. You will be fine. That night, the parking lot was a sea of darkness. The lone lampposts flickered like dying fireflies. My boots echoed too loudly on the concrete as I crossed to the service entrance. I tried not to think about the stories. I tried to focus on the paycheck waiting for me if I just stuck it out. The first few hours were uneventful. I walked the upper level with my flashlight, sweeping the beam over storefronts I once knew by heart. Kensington's department store, Golden Walk, Galaxy Arcade, Styles Unlimited. The letters on the signs had begun to peel, leaving only ghostly outlines. I checked the locked entrances, then circled back through the food court. But even before the strange noises, there was something off, subtle things that only bothered me once I thought about them. The air temperature fluctuated wildly between corridors. In one hall, it was cold enough to see my breath. In the next, it was almost stifling. Faint smell of perfume familiar but unplaceable wafted past me, even though every cosmetics counter had been ripped out years ago. I stopped at the security office to log my patrol. The monitors showed nothing but static, except Camera 4. Camera 4 glowed faintly, showing a corner of the main concourse under the skylight. It was empty, but I kept glancing back at it, half expecting movement. People like to think abandoned places are dead, but they are not. They are dormant, like a hibernating animal. All the echoes of voices and footsteps and laughter sink into the walls. And sometimes late at night, maybe those echoes wake up. When I leaned back in the rickety chair and closed my eyes for a second, I could almost hear them all alive again. The murmur of shoppers, the squeak of sneakers on polished floors, the jingle of a sale announcement. It was almost comforting until I opened my eyes and remembered I was alone. Around midnight, I started another round. I decided to cut through the old electronics store, just a shortcut. Though I hated the place, its shelves were still lined with brittle plastic price tags, yellowed with age. The smell of ozone hung in the air, as if something electrical had just sparked. In the corner, I noticed something new. Faint tracks in the dust. 2 parallel lines, like the wheels of a shopping cart, weaving between the aisles. They were fresh. I knelt, touching the edges. The dust had been displaced recently. My stomach nodded. I followed the tracks a few steps before they faded into undisturbed dust. There was nowhere they could have gone. The store's doors had been locked for years. I backed out, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The mall suddenly felt larger, emptier, and hungrier. I told myself to finish my patrol and go back to the office. That is what I did. But every sound, the groan of fetlin met, the distant drip of a leaky pipe sounded like footsteps following just out of sight. That was the night's first whisper. A reminder that Riverside Galleria was not just a building. It was a graveyard of memories, and something inside it was still awake, sifting through the bones. The next patrol started quietly enough, but by then the silence was no longer the kind that comforts. It pressed against my eardrums like deep water, heavy and waiting. My boots clicked along the tiled corridor, echoing off the shuttered storefronts. I tried humming under my breath in old habit when I got nervous, but even my own voice sounded foreign, like it was being swallowed by the building. The first thing that unsettled me was the mannequins. I passed the boutique on the lower level twice, every shift. Earlier, the figures inside had been lined neatly in a row, all facing forward, their dust-covered dresses hanging limp. Now, one of them was turned halfway toward the glass, its arm bent upward as though it had waved at me in frozen mid-gesture. I blinked, checked for footprints in the dust on the inside of the window. None. The lock on the door was still chained, but that arm was not like that before. I felt a chill but forced a shrug. Plastic does not move on its own, I told myself. Maybe I remembered wrong. Half an hour later, faint music threaded through the empty halls. It was not loud enough to be certain, more like the memory of music. At first I thought it was my phone, but the screen was dark. The melody was tinny, warbling, and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. After a moment, I recognized it. The old carousel tune from the Galleria's merry-go-round, the carousel that had been disconnected from power for almost a decade. I walked faster toward the atrium, but when I arrived, the horses were still and broken, frozen. No lights, no music, just silence, and the faint smell of mildew. I decided to check the food court to calm myself, at least there. The big open space and skylights felt less claustrophobic. The food court tables were coated in dust, trays stacked like forgotten relics. I leaned on the railing and looked down at the lower level. For a second, I thought I saw someone, a small figure maybe, a child darting between the benches below. My breath caught. Then the space was empty again. I stayed there, heart hammering, until the only sound was the buzz of an ancient exit sign back in the security office. I tried to laugh at myself. Sleep deprivation plays tricks. The bank of monitors was dark, except for the ever-flickering camera 4. This time the image was darker than before, almost like the lens was fogged. As I watched, a faint glimmer of movement passed across the screen, a shifting shadow that did not match the skylight columns or my own patrol routes. It disappeared before I could blink. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Static interference, an old tape loop, maybe even a mouse crawling across the camera housing. But my gut whispered something else. That the mall-ested spaces were not as dead as I had been told. I kept moving, partly because standing still felt like inviting something to approach. Passing the old electronics store again, I noticed the dust patterns on the floor had changed. The faint cart tracks I had seen earlier were going to rest, as if someone had swept them away, replaced by a single line of small, bare footprints leading straight into a locked storeroom door. I tried the handle, still chained, still sealed. I stepped back, pulse racing, and told myself I was imagining patterns that were never there. Every squeak of my shoes now sounded doubled, as though someone matched my pace a half step behind. I spun around more than once, but the corridors yawned empty in every direction. Once, I thought I heard a whisper a woman's voice, very soft, say something like, "Just browsing." The words were too faint to be sure, and by the time I whipped my flashlight toward the sound, only stale air met the beam. Memories kept surfacing unbidden. I remembered my sister begging for a stuffed rabbit from one of these very stores, and my mother buying it for her after Christmas sales. The memory should have been warm. Instead, it felt warped, as if the mall itself was showing me old slides of my life, out of order, to lure me into trust. Near the sealed entrance to the old movie theater, I saw something stranger. A pile of fresh shopping bags. They were crisp white plastic, the kind Kensingtons used to give out, with bold blue letters that read, "Thank you for shopping." They were filled with nothing but air. I knew those bags could not have been there earlier. My flashlight trembled as I prodded one with my boot. Static crackled faintly, like a distant radio tuning between stations. I backed away quickly, leaving the bags untouched. By now, the rationale explanations, vandals, squatters, electrical quirks were collapsing under their own weight. The mall felt attentive, like a stage waiting for actors, and I, foolish night god, was the only one available to play the part. I decided to finish the round quickly and retreat to the office. As I cut past the central atrium, the flickering skylight above seemed to dim, though I could not tell if the clouds outside had shifted, or if something enormous had just passed between the glass and the moon. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of old perfume, again sweet, but faintly rancid, as though it had been sprayed decades ago and never quite dissipated. Just as I reached the service hallway, the sound shattered the stillness. The soft, unmistakable clatter of a single coin dropping onto tile. It rang out sharp and clear, bouncing once, twice, before rolling to a stop. My flashlight beam darted to the source. A lone quarter glimmered on the floor, perfectly clean amid the dust. I had not carried any change. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the whole mall was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I did not pick up the coin. I turned, forced my legs to move, and walked calmly at first, then faster toward the security office. Behind me, far off in the atrium, the carousel music tinkled to life again for 3 hollow notes, then cut off. That was when I knew whatever was inside Riverside Galleria was not just passing through, it was watching. It was playing with me, the way a cat toys with a mouse. By the time I started my 4th patrol, the mall no longer felt like a building. It felt like a mind one that had decided to notice me. The lights above the atrium flickered again, but this time there was rhythm to it. 3 quick flashes, a pause, then 2 more. It reminded me of someone tapping their fingers impatiently on a counter. The pattern repeated twice before stopping. I stared upward, half expecting to see someone standing on the balcony with a remote switch. Nothing but shadowed storefronts and silent horses on the carousel. I made myself keep walking. The sound of my boots against the tile had taken on a strange echo-like footsteps answering a half-second too late. I turned down the east wing toward the old department stores. Dust coated everything in a dull gray film. But there, in front of a long shuttered shoe outlet, was a streak through the grime as if a door had recently swung wide. I ran my fingers along the mark. The dust crumbled fresh under my touch. The air shifted warm suddenly, smelling faintly of buttered popcorn. For a split second I thought I heard the faint whir of a popcorn machine. That smell pulled me back to childhood. My father handing me a paper bag of popcorn after a Saturday matinee at the Galleria cinema. I almost smiled until I saw the security monitor in my hand flicker on. The portable screen showed camera 4 again, though I had not touched any buttons. The feed was jumpy, snowy, but I could make out the main concourse, and then, through the static, a figure glided across the frame. It was too tall, shoulders too narrow, as though someone had stretched a human shape like taffy. The figure pushed something, maybe a cart, maybe nothing at all. The feed glitched, cutting between empty hallways and bursts of static, then froze on a single, impossible frame. The atrium carousels spinning in perfect clarity, every bulb lit, though I knew for a fact it had no power. I lowered the monitor, breath ragged. When I looked up again, the corridor ahead seemed subtly changed. A store I swore had been boarded up now stood open, its display windows glowing faintly. Inside, mannequins posed in immaculate winter coats and racks of sweaters looked freshly stocked. A sign above the door read, "Holiday clearance, everything must go." Letters pristine, as if painted yesterday. I stepped closer, trying to convince myself it was a trick of memory or exhaustion. The air inside smelled crisp, like new fabric. A faint melody floated out soft piano, like background music in a department store. I blinked, and the lights inside flickered. The racks were empty again. The sign above was faded and crack. My reflection in the dusty glass looked pale and unfamiliar. A crackle on the radio made me jump. At first it was only static. Then a whisper threaded through. "Can I help you find something?" The voice was gentle, female, almost exactly the tone you would expect from a helpful sales associate. I raised the radio to my lips, but could not think of a reply. The whisper came again, distorted. "You dropped something." I spun around. On the floor behind me lay a crumpled Kensington's shopping bag. I had not been carrying a bag. The handle swayed slightly, as if someone invisible had just set it down. I backed away toward the nearest service hall. My flashlight flickered wildly, then steadied. The corridor behind me seemed longer than before, stretching into darkness where the emergency exit should have been. I walked quickly, then broke into a jog. My boots clattered louder, the echoes doubling, tripling, until it sounded like a small crowd following me. At the junction near the food court, I skidded to a stop. The carousel stood illuminated just for a heartbeat. Every bulb blazed gold, and the horses gleamed as if freshly painted. The carousel rotated slowly, silent, the music absent. On the nearest horse, a figure sat sideways, legs crossed elegantly. Their face was turned away, but the back of their head was familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. It looked like my sister from that childhood memory, her hair in the same braid, her shoulders the same slope. I took a step forward. The carousel lights blinked out. When my eyes adjusted, the ride was still, broken, and empty. My sister's laugh echoed faintly, then dissolved into static. I gripped my radio again. "Ron, are you there?" Only hissing. Then, beneath the static, the faint sound of a cash register bell. I decided to check the security office for any explanation. As I approached, the office door stood ajar. Inside, the monitors flickered, every single one active now. Each screen displayed a different part of the mall, but the images were wrong. Stores fully stocked, shoppers wandering, children tugging at their parents' hands. The footage was crisp and alive, as if it were a normal weekend at Riverside Galleria circa 2008. But none of the people had faces, just smooth, blank ovals, where eyes and mouths should have been. On one screen, I saw myself standing in the security office, watching the monitors. My digital self turned slowly toward the camera, though I had not moved. For a split second, its blank face tilted, as if listening to something just outside the frame. The feed cut to black. The air pressure in the office changed. A low, almost inaudible hum filled my ears. I felt watched, not from one direction, but from all of them at once. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to run out into the parking lot and never look back. But some deeper, irrational part of me wanted to stay, to see. A faint scraping sound came from the hall behind me, like a cartwheel catching on a crack in the tile. It stopped as soon as I turned. Then the music returned, distant but unmistakable. Everything you need, all in one place. The mall's old jingle, clearer now, carrying a promise that felt more like a threat. I took one last look at the dead monitors, then stepped back into the corridor. The mall seemed brighter now, store signs glowing faintly as though power had been restored. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. Then came the sound of dozens of footsteps, moving together in perfect unison, heading in my direction. I should have run. Instead, I stood frozen, listening as the steps grew louder, closer, surrounding me from hallways that had been empty minutes ago. The footsteps became a tidal wave, echoing through the tiled corridors like 100 invisible shoppers hustling toward a sale that never ended. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Shapes began to coalesce at the edges of the atrium's shadows. They weren't quite people, more like the outlines of mannequins given a hint of motion, their limbs bent slightly wrong, their movements just too smooth, like a video played at the wrong frame rate. Each time my light passed over them, they seemed to freeze, only to be closer when I looked again. The carousel flickered back to life with a groaning whine. Its horses gleamed as though freshly lapped, and now each horse bore a rider, a blank-faced shopper frozen in mid. I knew those postures. The way a dad leans slightly to help his kid balance, the way a teenager slouches to look cooler. These figures were stitched from memory, as if the mall had stolen every visitor who had ever passed through and built new patrons from their ghosts. A whispering hiss tickled my ears like the sound of countless paper shopping bags rustling at once. It grew into a chorus. Soft, repetitive phrases that were almost familiar. Half off. Everything must go. Find what you need. The words overlapped until they became a single droning hum, more felt in my bones than heard. I backed toward the east exit, but the sign above the door no longer read exit. It read checkout, glowing in bright red neon. My heart slammed against my ribs. Behind me, a soft cha-ching rang out, impossibly loud in the dead air. I turned down another corridor, desperate to find a way out. But the mall had shifted. Stores I'd walked past 100 times had rearranged themselves. A defunct toy store now yawned open into an endless aisle of shelves that stretched farther than the eye could see. Every shelf stocked with identical, unmarked boxers. A clothing store's mirrors multiplied infinitely, reflecting not me, but dozens of faceless shoppers walking in perfect synchronization behind my shoulder. My radio crackled. A voice, faint and genderless, whispered, "You forgot your receipt." Then, the sound of tearing paper. I sprinted. My boots squealed on the tile as I rounded a corner only to find myself back at the atrium again, standing under the flickering carousel. The riders' heads had turned toward me. Not all at once, one after another, like falling dominoes, each blank face rotating until every eyeless gaze locked onto me. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun and caught a glimpse of a woman-shaped shadow slipping behind a support column. I heard the swish of her shopping bags, the click of her heels. My flashlight's beam shook wildly across the floor, illuminating scattered price tags that hadn't been there a moment ago. Each one bore the same word in bold, black letters. Returned. I whispered to myself, "This isn't real. I'm tired, just tired." My voice cracked, but the mall answered with its jingle again, warped and slowed to a crawl. "Eve, everything you need, all in one plotches." The lights above flickered violently, plunging me into intermittent darkness. Every blackout felt longer, and each time the lights returned, The shoppers were closer. In one blink, they were 10 feet away. In the next 5, their faceless heads tilted in perfect unison, as though they could smell my fear. I bolted for the escalator, 2 steps at a time, but halfway up, the steps flattened and turned slick beneath my feet. The escalator had become a smooth metal slide, depositing me back onto the lower floor. I hit the tile hard. The wind knocked out of me. Above, the second floor loomed impossibly high, as if the mall had grown while I blinked. I crawled toward a side hallway I hadn't seen before. Its sign read customer service. The door opened into darkness. Inside, the smell of buttered popcorn returned, stronger now, mixed with something rotten underneath. A single counterbell sat on a desk. On the wall behind it, dozens of Polaroids were pinned under glass. My heart stopped when I saw the images. Every single one was me, different angles, different patrols, different nights I had worked. Here taken without my knowledge. One photo was dated with tonight's date. In it, I was standing exactly where I was now, bent over, flashlight shaking. My own wide-eyed stare met me through the Polaroid's glossy surface, a sound behind me. Soft, polite, coughing, like a cashier waiting for my attention. I turned slowly. A single shopper stood there taller than anyone should be, its blank face tilted just enough to suggest a smile that wasn't there. In its hands, it held out a paper shopping bag. The bag bulged unnaturally, as if something inside was moving. "Your purchase," the voice whispered, though the figure hadn't moved its featureless mouth. I stumbled backward, knocking the counterbell to the floor. It rang once, shrill and final. The sound shattered the moment. Every light in the mall flared to blinding white. The shoppers' whispers ceased. For an instant, the mall was alive again, bright, bustling, filled with phantom families. I could smell cinnamon rolls and hear a baby cry. A banner overhead unfurled. Grand reopening? Back. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the illusion collapsed. The mall was empty again. The shoppers were gone, but the paper bag remained on the floor at my feet, twitching faintly as though something inside was eager to get out. I stared at it. Then, from deep within the bag, a muffled choching echoed, followed by the faint sound of my sister's laugh, just as it had been on that childhood carousel ride. I forced myself to look inside the bag. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the crumpled paper. Inside was a receipt, only a receipt sheet. The ink scrawled across it wasn't numbers or product codes, it was a sketch. My apartment's floor plan, every detail exact, even down to the chipped tile in my bathroom. Beneath it, one sentence in block letters: "Delivery scheduled tonight?" Panic surged. I dropped the bag and bolted for the nearest exit. The checkout sign above the door now pulsed like a heartbeat, red light spilling across the tiles. I shoved the crash bar, expecting cold night air, but the door opened onto another corridor of storefronts. The walls stretched impossibly far, lined with shops I'd never seen, names written in dead languages, windows displaying items that seemed to shimmer and twitch, objects that weren't quite three-dimensional, as though reality had given up trying to render them. I turned back, but the door was gone. Only a seamless stretch of plaster greeted me. "Just keep moving," I whispered, though my voice sounded foreign in my ears. The malls jingled, hummed faintly, but reversed. the notes tumbling backward like a tape rewinding. E Calpiano, Johnny, Dean Woy. Nitarabe. I passed a food court that had been a ruin minutes ago now, alive with light and smell. Ghostly families sat at tables, mouths moving silently as they pretended to eat invisible meals. The fryers hissed, though no oil burned. A man in a faded fast food uniform leaned over the counter, head bowed. When he looked up, his face was a perfect oval of smooth skin. No eyes, no mouth, yet his expression, if it could be called, that radiated hunger. I ran. My radio hissed to life. Delivery in progress. A chorus of voices repeated it, overlapping, until it became a chant that reverberated through the walls. At the far end of the hall, a glass door showed the parking lot bathed in moonlight. My car waited, a perfect, normal shape in the distance. Relief surged through me. I sprinted, lungs burning, the slap of my boots loud in the stillness. My hand met the door's handle, it turned easily. Cold night air hit my face, sharp and clean. I stepped outside and froze. The parking lot wasn't the one I'd driven into. The asphalt stretched endlessly, dotted with cars that looked normal at first glance, but melted into impossible angles when I blinked. The sky overhead was a dark, spinning vortex of stars I didn't recognize. Constellations forming and reforming into advertisements. Neon slogans for stores that had never existed. Universe Outfitters, Event Horizon Jewelry, Finesse. Oh, realities must go. Behind me, the mall facade had changed. The sign didn't read Riverside Galleria anymore. It was a vast, cosmic billboard. Grand reopening forever. Something moved in the distance. At first, I thought it was shoppers streaming out of the mall, but their forms were too fluid, stretching and contracting like shadows underwater. Their carts rolled silently over the infinite asphalt, filled with shapes that bent light. A voice behind me, a whisper. I knew instantly my sister's voice, unchanged from childhood. You should not have come without a list. I turned slowly. The carousel horse stood on the asphalt, alone, spinning lazily in place without a base or pole. Its painted eyes watched me. On its saddle sat a small, glowing price tag, returned to sender. I bolted from my car, fumbling for my keys. The driver's door opened, and I slid in, heart hammering. The dashboard clock read 9:03 p.m. The exact time my shift had started. I twisted the key in the ignition. The engine purred. For a moment, the world outside looked normal again. The same lot, the same moon, the mall, dark and lifeless in the distance. I laughed shakily, the sound breaking in my throat. It was a hallucination, I whispered. Lack of sleep. Stress. Then I glanced at the passenger seat. A paper shopping bag sat there, identical to the one from the customer service desk. Inside, the receipt waited. A new line had appeared beneath the floor plan. Thank you for your purchase. Nitrogen monoxide returns. The radio, dead for hours, clicked on by itself. The mall's jingle played, crisp and cheerful. Then a cashier's voice, bright and polite. Your delivery has been completed. Please come again. Outside the windshield, the parking lot lights flickered, spelling out 2 words in staccato flashes. Welcome back. I put the car in gear and drove. The road unwound endlessly, lined with familiar storefronts only. They shouldn't have been there. Every mile revealed another wing of the mall. Toy stores I'd loved as a kid. Fast food counters I'd forgotten. All lit and waiting. There was no horizon, no edge, just aisle after aisle of reality, on sale and restocked forever. Somewhere behind me, the carousel's music followed, growing fainter, then louder again, as though it were pacing me. I don't know if I ever left the mall. I don't know if there is a world outside it anymore. But if you're hearing this, if you ever take a job in a dead mall for easy money, remember this. Nothing stays abandoned forever. Some doors do not lead out. Some bargains cost everything. And somewhere, beneath the flickering lights and the scent of popcorn, something is still shopping.